Welcome to another module of Introduction to Public Services. Library Programming is a State of Iowa core course for the State Library Endorsement Program. My name is Becky Heil, and I am the Southeast District Consultant and a member of the Continuing Education team for the State Library. We're going to talk today about the importance of providing programming in your library for a variety of age groups and talk about how the program planning process works. First, we're going to look at programming as just another service. So much of this will look familiar if you've completed the Library Services module. There are many services that you may provide for your community, so programming is just one of them. But it's the one that makes libraries more than just places for collection. Library services should always go back to the library's overall mission and goals, and programming is one way to do that. Libraries have a long history of providing public programming, especially entertainment-based. Things like story hours, author visits, or summer library programs are all examples. Most libraries have a mission statement that relates back to lifelong learning, and many of the goals and objectives are going to need a program to help achieve them and to meet your community needs. Just like other services, there can be formal and non-formal programs. Non-formal programs can get a little muddy between the idea of service or program. Passive programming, which is also sometimes called self-directed programming, might be something like a Make It, Take It STEM or STEAM kit, or a tech petting zoo where you put out gadgets for patrons to play with. Those are both examples of passive programming. One of the things that may come out of a formal computer workshop is the need for one-on-one computer help, maybe via Skype or via instant messaging. These are also both examples of the informal type of education that takes place in libraries. There's a lot of emphasis lately on the shifting roles of a public library. Instead of just being a book warehouse, they're becoming a place for community engagement. As post offices close and local schools consolidate and small businesses are going out of business, the library becomes the community hub for information. How do we take that new emphasis on engagement and make it into a program? It might include things like a candidates forum or a panel discussion on Black Lives Matter. The library is providing programs for community members to grow as humans and citizens. But why is programming so important? This video is an example that shows how the arts, things like knitting or painting or being a storyteller, can be great for older adults. Let's see how library programming can make an impact. This is just one example of how library programming can change lives. It can tie back to those overall planning goals that libraries chose when doing strategic planning. In many plans, there are goals related to keeping seniors in their homes, or keeping seniors engaged with the community, or providing intergenerational programs for seniors. Library programs are tailor-made for helping achieve those objectives. This slide is just a quick review of the demographics that we've taken from the Library Services module. If you remember, we broke down the youth category into several different ages, and then we talked about those developmental stages for each of them. We have birth to age 6, we have ages 7 to 12, and ages 13 to 18. And the variety of developmental stages were things like language and physical development. Then, if you remember, we also looked at the ways that we can divide adults as we think about providing services for them. We can certainly look at programs based on age demographics, like maybe a book club held in a bar for millennials, or financial management for baby boomers. But we might also think about providing a look at retirement for the group we call pre-retirees, or maybe how to cook for two for empty nesters. And we can look at how people choose to look at lifelong learning. Do young adults want hands-on classes on how to do canning and freezing? Or do they prefer to use a website devoted to resources that give them information about that subject? Or would they prefer to just check out books that they see on a display about canning and freezing? This slide gives us some really good examples of library programs that are actually taking place in libraries in Iowa. One of my favorites is the community concert idea that's used in Washington Public Library. They have a grand piano in their library, and so they do lunchtime concerts. But one of the best things that I think they do for inviting people to come to the library is the kids who are going to contest. Maybe it's a state speech contest, or maybe it's a music contest. Those kids will come to the library and do a presentation for their parents, for their grandparents, for their neighbors, for anybody interested in coming to listen. It's great because it gives those people an opportunity to see something they wouldn't have been able to see their student perform. And it's also great for the students as they get to practice what they're doing for their contest. Another good example of things that are going on in public libraries have to do with early literacy. What if you partner with a local daycare to teach parents about using books with young children? Feed them supper and provide babysitting. Another great one that libraries have been taking advantage of is using Zoom for author visits. You're not just limited to those local authors anymore, and it can be far less expensive as they don't have to do travel expenses. One that I've heard of a lot, sometimes it's called Books and Brews, it's sometimes called other names, and it happens to take place. It may be a book club for millennials, and it may take place in a coffee shop, or it may take place in a bar. Think about trends that are happening in your community. Escape rooms were really big in communities, particularly right before the pandemic. And many libraries jumped on that bandwagon and started holding those in the public library. Yoga might become a new trend in your community. What if the library holds a yoga class at 7 o'clock every morning in their community room? Asking patrons to do programs on their hobby is also a great way to get free or cheap programs, but it's also a really good way to connect with your patrons. Make them feel a part of the library. And don't forget to think outside the box. There are a few libraries in Iowa that have put together Nerf battles for their older teens or sometimes young adults and millennials. They close the library down, and maybe on a Friday night or a Saturday evening or a Sunday afternoon, if they aren't open, the patrons come to the library and use the entire library building as a place to have a Nerf battle. That may not be something you typically think of in a library, but it's a way to get those young adults engaged and participating in library programs. Of course, if you're going to do a summer program for preschoolers, you need to figure out if it was successful or not. Project Outcome is a free service that you can use to measure your impact. Librarians are really good at counting things. We know how many preschool programs we held, and we know how many kids attended and how many parents were there. But do we know if it really mattered to any of our attendees? What was the impact on our community or on a certain individual? In another module, we'll be talking about telling the library story. We're finding that it's no longer enough to just provide statistics. We need to put those numbers in context, and we need to have good stories to tell our funders. Using what we call outcome-based evaluation is a good way to find these stories and to make our case for better budgets. Project Outcome is a great way to gather that information through surveys with very little effort on your part. Now we're going to look and identify the parts of how to plan a library program. These are the major parts as you're looking through the programming process. Remember, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. There are lots of ways out there like newsletters, Facebook. There's something called Storytime Underground or Pinterest to help you get ideas and work through that programming process. We're going to take a look at each of these individually. So, where do ideas for programs come from? Certainly take your cues from your patrons. They'll have lots of ideas of what they might be interested in. And I mentioned earlier trends. Look at the things that are going on in your community. Open up the newspaper, find out what kinds of clubs are meeting or what the major news stories are about, and use those trends to think of ways that you could get people to come to the library. Library Talk, the State Library of Iowa Bulletin Board, is also a great way to talk to people about what kinds of ideas they're doing for programming. Certainly, other libraries can be one of your best sources. I mentioned earlier Pinterest or Facebook. Make sure that you follow some of those other libraries, either those in your area or those from across the state or libraries that are doing interesting things across the country. You also want to go back to your strategic plan to make sure that the ideas that are in there can then be translated into programs. And of course, as we're doing strategic planning, one of the things we try to identify is what are our community needs? And that's a really great way to come up with program ideas. As I've mentioned, many times your ideas come from somewhere else. Remember, we don't steal in library land. We just borrow those good ideas. Those programming seeds may come from ideas that you borrow from other libraries. You can get those ideas by actually visiting other libraries and picking up their flyer or their calendar. Or you can simply read professional journals, which often include programming ideas. Or you can peruse other libraries' websites. You can also attend conferences or webinars or similar training opportunities. I attended a national webinar a few months ago that had all kinds of good programming suggestions, and they were all designed for small libraries. Pay attention to the list of national webinars that Samantha Bauer sends out each month via email. There are always good program ideas in there. I've said it already, but we have to remember to always tie your program goals back to the overall library mission. Every good program starts with goals, and you may identify several different types of goals. You might have audience goals. Who is the program going to serve? What's the percent of the target population? Why are we doing it for this audience? What are their interests? What are their needs? How might they benefit from attending? Another type of goal may be a collection goal or a thematic goal. Maybe you want to make sure that your nonfiction books get used a little bit more. Or maybe you'd like to tie it into other library events. So it may be a thematic goal. A third thing would be community goals. How is the community going to benefit from this? Who might be our community partners? And then last, we have program goals. How is the library going to benefit? What do you want to accomplish? What will you do after? Is this going to raise awareness of the library? Now let's talk about actually planning a program. You're probably going to want to start with a timeline. The item on the left came from a WebJunction planning document that I've not been able to find anymore except for this screenshot. So take a look at some of these and then you'll have to take it a little farther yourself. Asana also has a planning website. If you're not familiar with that website and program, make sure you look at that because it's a really great way to share information with other employees. Sometimes it's as simple as a desk calendar or a wall calendar. The example that's on the right is being used by a library in California. This is actually a city template, so it's for a larger community, but it has some really good suggestions. It takes us right back to that strategic planning with words like goals and objectives and measurements and evaluation. Back to the one on the left, when you think about things, think about how far back you're going to need to start. So maybe 4 months ahead of the program, you want to develop the concept. You want to choose the dates. Then maybe 3 months ahead, you're going to start planning your marketing and your publicity. At 8 to 12 weeks, you may start distributing those flyers and making arrangements at all the facilities. You may be thinking about things like press releases, making sure that you have your guest speakers all confirmed, making sure the signage is all there. At 2 weeks, you might be thinking about what job assignments you're giving to your staff. Think about how far in advance you need to plan for summer reading. Frequently, we start planning in the fall of the year before that next summer. That's a really good model to use for other programs. It doesn't mean that you can't add things or change things last minute, but it does help give you a good structure. So let's take a look at this sample program budget. One of the primary things to think about when planning a program is a budget. This is just a very simple one, but it gets at the major categories of expenses. And then don't forget to include how are you going to pay for this program? Is it just coming out of your regular budget? Or do you have other sources of income like grants or fees or something from your friends and foundation? This can be as simple or as complex as the program needs. Of course, we're going to prepare the program. You're going to need to contact speakers or partners. You're going to have to make sure your staff and your board knows what's happening. One way to ensure a good program that will have good attendance and people returning is to practice and prepare for the event. You will woo your patrons with a good reputation for providing good programs if you can follow this tip. One tip from a local librarian that I spoke with said, if you're doing crafts, make sure you do a sample craft first. You never know what's going to happen with those. Programming takes work. Just as good things are worth waiting for, so also good programs usually don't just come to those who sit and wait. Attendance at your programs and a regular following may come to those who are persistently patient and who work hard. But don't think you have to develop and present the entire program all by yourself. Think of how you can utilize other people and resources in your area to develop and present programs. It might include things like gathering your materials, reserving your room, and don't forget to practice if you're the one doing the presentation. You want to have a smoothness to it. Double checking everything and don't forget to arrive early to make sure things are carefully set up. When you're looking at the day and the time and the location, there are lots of factors that will go into that, so think carefully about that as well. You want to make sure all the details are covered once you get your idea into place. It may include things like sending out reminders for registration, verifying that the guest presenters are actually coming, or just going through the program in your head. And my last piece of advice, Don't think that if you see a cool program at a large library, that you can't offer it at your smaller library. Shape the idea to fit the needs of your community and your library. Tweak it. Take a part of it and implement that. And another one is to not be worried about small attendance. That doesn't mean the program didn't have impact. What if you're putting together a program on resume writing and only 3 people show up? It feels like a failure. But maybe 2 weeks later, someone comes back to the library who attended that program and said they got a job because of the changes that they made to their resume based on what you taught them at that workshop. That's the impact that your library programs can have. Just because it's small attendance doesn't mean it was a failure. Above all, you've got to promote, promote, and promote like crazy. And of course, that means promote it outside of your library's walls. If you only put up a flyer or a poster in your library, you're only reaching the people inside your library. They're already coming. You're likely missing a huge potential audience if you don't go beyond your front doors to promote your events. I have attended meetings with library board members who talk about things like, well, let's put this in the newspaper. And then somebody else pipes up and says, but young people don't get the newspaper. And then someone else says, let's put it on Facebook. And somebody says, but old people don't use Facebook. And don't forget, people shop out of town, so why bother putting it downtown? And not everybody goes past the digital sign if we put it there. When I listen to those, I usually listen for a little bit, and then I tell them all to stop and remind them that they need to use all of those ways to promote their program. Yes, a lot of young people don't get the newspaper. So if you only put it in the newspaper, you're going to miss a large segment of your audience. And no, a lot of seniors aren't on Facebook. So if you only promote it in Facebook, again, you'll miss a large segment of your audience. Use them all. We'll have more on this in the module Telling the Library Story. But don't forget flyers, posters, Facebook, and other social media, signs that you have in town, or your website are all good places to let people know about the great things going on at your library. So the day of the program, don't forget about things like room setup. Again, contacting your speakers, making sure the staff is on board and knows what's happening. Refreshments are always a big part of that. And evaluation is something we don't want to forget. Let's take a look at this image and see how we can think through what the person did to set up for this program. The chairs had to be set up in advance. If you notice, there are little kids in smaller chairs in the front. Think through those ideas as you're putting your chairs out. What's going to be the best way to have your speaker highlighted? I love the idea of the balloons that are around the area there. You can see them tied to the chairs, and they were in other places in the room. It's just a way to make it a little bit more festive and fun. When you look back, you see the author who is sitting in front of a display of books. This author is surrounded by the books. And then they put the refreshments in another room, which is always a great idea if you can separate that out. Another piece of advice, don't forget to develop a portfolio of your programs and your ideas. Storing them can include things like keeping records of the ideas, keeping records of the actual programs. What did you do for promotion? Did it work? Make sure that your contacts that you talk to are all included in that, and any photos that you took during the event. Of course, the day of, after it's all over, we have cleanup. And then don't forget that evaluation. If you're going to do a survey, be sure to check out project outcome. Don't forget to count the attendance. Remember, you want to report this to your director, to your board, to your friends of the library. And the last piece, don't forget to say thank you to everyone involved. Thank the audience. Thank your presenter. Thank your staff and any helpers that you may have had. We're going to end today by highlighting just a few of the many resources that are available for library programming. If you haven't already come across WebJunction, you'll want to look at all the information they provide for libraries and librarians. They have live webinars, recordings, and articles on every subject imaginable. And although this is focused on programs for children, the After School Alliance can provide you with creative ideas, ways to partner with your community, and research about informal educational opportunities. It includes a report titled The Growing Importance of After School in Rural Communities, and libraries can specifically be a piece of that. And then one of my favorite websites is called The Programming Librarian. It's a place for library professionals to share, learn, and be inspired to present excellent programming for their communities. On their website, you can see Browse Ideas. You can check out programs done by real libraries in a variety of budgets. You can search by topic, by library type, or by potential audience. On the Programming Librarian website, it states, through resources, ideas, and professional development opportunities, we seek to help libraries fill their role as cultural and civic hubs in their communities. I can't think of a better way to describe what a library provides with the myriad of programs they present in their community. This concludes the library programming module of the Director Endorsement course, Introduction to Library Services. And don't forget, you may always call your district consultant for more information about this topic. And thanks for watching.